Right. Do you recall, for those who are of age, that moment in the movie The Matrix where Neo, that's Keanu Reeves, ceased to be an actor in someone else's world and he became the director of his own? And as this image depicts, he could magically see the source code of the world that he lived in, which meant he was capable of achieving incredible force multiplying acts. We believe that a lot of the historic challenges and labor and burden associated with the maintenance of a template library can be significantly avoided by exploring what the source code, if you like, of the contract itself and the contracting process. If we correctly and more efficiently conceptualize the contract and the nature of contracting, we believe that the whole process of designing and managing a template library is massively streamlined. So understanding the true anatomy and nature of contracts actually has profound implications for your design strategy, your management, your use, and your maintenance of the template library. And by viewing it from a slightly different perspectives, you're able to tap into a whole range of efficiencies that ineffectively wipe out many of the challenges that we shared with you at the beginning of this presentation. So let me start with first the question: why do we end up with such a large, most teams, why do we end up with such large and unwieldy volumes of legal templates? Why do our libraries become so difficult to manage? Why are there so many things? I mean, let me pose a question. How many types of agreements are there? Well, the answer to that, if you were in the matrix, would be determined by whether you took the red or the blue pill. We argue that if you were to consider from the perspective of length, right, there really are only two types of contracts. You've got long ones and you've got short ones, okay? How you draft a short agreement is necessarily different from how you are going to draft a long one. A short agreement for us is anything less than 10 pages. A long agreement is anything more than 11 pages and longer. Length of your document has consistent implications for the drafting style, the content, the layout, typically the positions which are sought in each clause. And fundamentally, if you adopt the perspective of length and noting the way you draft a short agreement and the way you draft a long agreement, there are just two types of agreements. We need to, if we want a best practice library, we need to leverage this. Okay, I'm going to pull these concepts together. Let's go further now in our search for more economic and efficient principles that are going to help us manage our template libraries. Let's look at the prolific template multiplying area of procurement. Okay, we meet companies that literally have procurement teams that are managing hundreds of supporting templates. Okay, procurement functions, I don't know what your experience is in your own organization, but they seem to bring templates like rabbits. But are so many templates needed? Well, what if we looked at procurement need for templates by reference to vendor relationship status? How many would we need then? Our view, and the techniques that we use helping people develop templates or procurement functions, is why don't we consider it from the relationship perspective, which means actually there's really only two types of templates we need. There are templates that we use on a one and done basis or a single use basis with a vendor. And then the only other type of vendor that we have is ones that we want to have ongoing relationships with or multiple use scenarios. If we look at the one and dones, within that, we effectively have what we've just covered before, long and short ones. For granular good management, PO-based T's and C's is a form of short form, but because they're not negotiable, they're kind of a differentiated class. So let's just say for single use, we have but three types of agreements that we need. For relationships that are ongoing in nature in the procurement or supply chain space, there's two types. frameworks for group-based relationships, and MSAs, which are effectively, relationship agreement that allow for operational mechanism and leverage by affiliates. So procurement doesn't need to have umpteen different types of agreements. They need to conceptualize their need for agreement, and it comes down to two types, right? Single transaction agreements and multiple transaction agreements. And the question arises, why do they need so many types of agreements? And the answer is they don't. But let's go even deeper into the matrix, okay? Let's look at what we call the contracting carbon principle. Now, carbon, as you know, is present in every living organism in the planet, and it's essentially the same element, okay? The carbon principle, the carbon contracting principle, has stunning implications for template production and library maintenance scenarios. Let's explore it. The carbon principle, and I defy any legal team to challenge this proposition, because no one's managed to do it in 25 years. 70% of every standard commercial agreement is effectively the same. How you introduce the parties is effectively the same. How you express the governing law is effectively the same. The carbon principle, or as we call it in the GLS vocabulary, the build, the boilerplate of the agreement, the interpretation provisions of the agreement, those 6 major legal risk arbiters, your limitations of liability, termination, and the like, the definitions, for at least 80% of your standard commercial agreements, those provisions will be identical. If they're not, it's because you haven't applied your group legal policy properly or consistently, or because you are choosing not to leverage the power of standardization. You need 2 types of builds because you've got 2 types of agreements. You need a long form build and you need a short form build. Okay. So if you can master your organization's build to create that 70% of every commercial agreement that you might need in that 80% scenario, we'll talk more about that in a minute. By doing that one initiative and maintaining that one asset, you've created 70% of any contract template you're ever likely to need. And just think of the challenges that you have effectively wiped out by leveraging this concept. But let's go even further, okay? Let's explore what efficiencies are available to you from a template requirement and subsequent library management perspective by considering what does the world look like when we view, what does our requirement look like when we look by reference to our, what we call negotiation profile, okay? Every organization has a negotiation profile. Some organizations are the hammer, some organizations are the nail. But when we look at our template requirement through the lens of negotiation profile, there are only 4 types of agreements. The plus sign indicates where we have bargaining power, and the minus is where less so. In the top left quadrant, we have the templates where our bargaining power is such that there's no negotiation. Typical example might be your purchase order. You want to buy 300 cubic litres of water, sign here, there's our T's and C's. The top right is where, by virtue of our market position or size or whatever factor it is that derives you or empowers you in terms of bargaining position, the work is done on your document, but there are a handful of provisions that might need to bend with the wind, okay? The bottom right is when we deal with the likes of the horrendous Microsofts or SunGuards. It's where the shoe is on the other foot. It's take it or don't do business with us. And then the final scenario is where, let's say we're building a power plant. Let's say we're doing something that's never been done before, where we have to, with our counterparty, build the agreement from scratch, okay? What does this mean for us? Well, This is what it means. It means there are only two scenarios really where we require our own paper. Our not negotiables, and as a legal team, we need to work through what are those scenarios where we don't negotiate. These are what our templates look like. And it has, you know, we need to maintain the 70% of those, and maintenance becomes a snack. There's those that are slightly negotiable, so we have to produce those templates. But we also have to work out how it is that we can bend or accommodate those slight variants. For the third parties that have all the power and offer us take it or leave it, we don't need templates for those. But what we need is something different. We need checklists. And obviously, for the totally bespoke scenario, we need our build, but we've already got our build. Our 70% of every commercial agreement is ready to go. So here is the point, right? And let me make it by way of an analogy. If you want a healthy tree, it's more efficient to place your efforts at maintaining the health of the root system as opposed to the health of the individual leaves. Obviously, there's some work to be done on the leaves, but overall optimal health, we need to concern ourselves with the root system. This applies to the 80% of contracts that we should be producing templates for in our business. You should never try, and I'm going to cover this in the principles, to try and have a contract for every scenario. 80% of the time, you can leverage, for that 80% contractual template requirement, you can leverage vast efficiencies by focusing your maintenance and your build efforts on quality root systems. These same principles apply, right, but these efficiencies can be achieved by leveraging on the fact that there really is two distinct types of contracts, long, short. We need to come up with standard basis preparing those. We need to get that 70% of the long and the 70% of the short built up, ready to go, compliant with group legal policy, never to be questioned again, right? Ready for everybody to use, right? And we also have to recognize that at a pinch, for some of your most popular commercial template contracting scenarios, such as procurement, there really is only 5 contract species. It's a very limited template requirement that we need to focus on and serve. So we can drastically reduce the effort it takes to create these templates and maintaining them by focusing on a limited number of concepts. The imagery here is picking up that if we work on those root concepts, such as our build, having our standard approach to short and long term templates, and really limiting our approach to the varietal of contracts that we need, and I'll cover that a little bit more in a second, right? The overall health of the tree will be exponentially greater. And then if we can also add in some sensible legal tech, which doesn't necessarily have to be one of these new fancy expensive CLMS systems, right? It could just be your basic SharePoint, but the leaves on your finished product can by and large look after themselves. Obviously, you know, that remaining 30% of provisions that will make an agreement a distinct subject matter, right? So a facilities management agreement versus a general services agreement, you know, 70% can be exactly the same. That 30% differs slightly, but even within the 30% that's specialist or specific to the subject matter, you'll find that this 70-30 rule always applies in each case. So, okay, now that we have explored some of those fundamental principles and have them out in the open, we're hoping that you will see that really good practice template creation is about restraint. We don't need hundreds of agreements differentiated only because they're different subject matter. The differentiation occurs at the DNA level, and there's very little difference that we actually really need to accommodate. Let's now take these principles and start unpacking what are the best practice features of best practice template management. So jumping right in. The library, and we all know libraries, most of us have still old enough to have actually visited one with real books in it, it has often been referred to as the memory of mankind. Okay, the structure of a library has driven mankind for thousands of years. The famous Dewey Decimal System, it's more than 140 years old, used in every library around the world, and that string of numbers looks more like an IP address, can get you to precisely where your book, the book you're seeking, is located. The most successful legal template libraries operate just like your community library. On the left, you see the basic structure of that library. The purpose, well, it's the repository of knowledge, right, for mankind. You can get history, geography, you can get fiction, non-fiction. The people that use it, the members, the community. Inside it, you're going to find books historically. But when you walk into that library, there are rules. Okay, you need to be quiet. You need to, if you're using the rare books, you need to wear gloves. No eating in the library. The books are housed in the building, the physical building in the corner in the town square. There's a place where you can go for help, right? There are self-help resources all the way through the library telling you how to orientate and guide your way through the library and use the different resources. The librarian's there determining overall strategy and management. These features of a library system that served mankind so well for so long are what underpins the design of a successful template library. Let's adapt the community library to the contract template library. Well, the purpose, well, we want high performance contracting. We've talked about that. The members, well, in contracting, it's the users. We're going to identify those in a few slides. It's your commercial people, it's your procurement teams, sometimes it's your lawyers. Instead of books, we have templates plus. Templates plus supporting tools. We're going to spend a bit of time talking about those necessary inclusions. The rules. Well, this is where many libraries fall down. The template libraries fall down. We don't have the appropriate rules. We're going to unpack that. The building is, for many legal teams, not always the CLMS. Sometimes it's the thumb drive. Sometimes it's the local hard drive of many different users all using their own libraries. The help desk, well, a best practice template library should have plenty of function help tools, right? And then instead of the librarian, we have the knowledge manager, or at least someone performing the knowledge management role. As you structure your plans for your template library, I urge you to lean in on the simplicity of your intuitive understanding of the community library, because it's an effective system and an effective reference point to bear in mind. Let's unpack some of those features in a little bit more detail. Well, we'll go straight into feature one, which is the objective. Okay. We've covered much of this already in the introductory remarks, but contracting is really about business enablement. Okay. Your templates and the infrastructure that hosts it, the library, should be geared to enabling your business to be able to do business more efficiently, better, faster, safer, cheaper. Necessarily, when you're creating your templates, right, there's specific tasks that you need to do. You need to actually go out and understand what those business requirements are, typically by reference to a business unit or product line or market specific audit. Performance KPIs, you need to understand what kind of time frames do your teams need to close these deals. You need to adapt templates to be able to achieve that. You need to work out whatever it is you need to work out as to what your organization needs in order for you, with your templates, right, and the ecosystem and the supporting infrastructure that associated with their use needs to achieve to deliver that better, faster feature, business rather. Feature two. Very, very important and most often overlooked. Your library must serve the needs of the users. Okay. Best practice templates and best practice template libraries are heavily architected by reference to the needs of users. And all too often, and we're guilty of this as an in-house community, we create something and we say, there it is, go sell your product based on that. Doesn't work, right? It's an iterative, it's a collaborative process. We need to understand the historic, current, and ongoing requirements of the internal users and they need to be factored in. Templates are not dynamic, they are updating. There are three categories of users. There are support users. These are the ones that use it most of the time. The big communities that do that are obviously the procurement people, huge function, contract administrators who administer things that are signed. We say vendors because they are, in an enlightened outlook, right? They are part of our success. Okay, if we don't get, if they can't perform and they don't deliver, then our business is impaired. So they are in effect a user. It doesn't mean that we capitulate every position to them, but we need to be mindful about what they need so they can deliver successfully. The Cameo users in a best practice template library are sales or commercial leads. I say Cameo because they should be spending all of their time, and they don't need to spend all of their time driving these negotiations if the documents are prepared properly. There's a level of time that needs to go into it, but not an inordinate amount of time. Same for lawyers. And the third category is a bit of a catch-all, depending on and accounting for how your organization is structured. There will always be other people that need to be involved, and you need to identify that and take into account their requirements. And so what are those requirements? Well, we have worked with literally hundreds of in-house teams and their associated internal user community, each case trying to audit their specific requirements to help upgrade their template libraries. And there are some common general requirements they're going to call out. In words, all users want documents that are obviously robust, i.e. they work, but they want simplicity. They want training on how to use these documents. They want libraries that are navigable. They just want documents in terms of the output that can achieve the better, faster, cheaper. But let's go a little bit deeper in terms of consistently recurring requirements of the internal user. When it comes to the content, a best practice library doesn't just contain a template, right? It contains tools and rules on how to use those templates, positions on what I can and can't do, when can I edit, who can approve it, and the like. The library structure is often the subject of great criticism, particularly if you're going to move to a very optimized form of template library solutions, and which offers self-help. People need to be able to find what they're looking for. So library structure is something that is particularly important, and it's most especially important if you aren't going to use a CLMS solution, right? Your library structuring and the file path directories become really important. Training, I've touched on that in the single word, but that's the loudest call that's consistently heard and made known, is that training needs to be relative to the actual documents that the users are expected to use. Library rules, we've touched on it, and maintenance. One of the biggest challenges that diminish confidence in template documentation is when were they last looked at? Do they still work? So there's a bunch of other concepts that are on that slide. One of the particular, the top right there is about the enabling features, right? What are the outcomes that people want to have from their template libraries? They want to be empowered. They want a library that allows user contribution to be rearticulated in. There's a better position. There's a better, we've been vying for a clause that it costs us hours to negotiate in every deal, and in 20 years there hasn't been that risk has never manifested itself. Our feedback is we don't need it. So a good practice template library system has the architecture and infrastructure that allows for user contribution to drive perpetual improvement. So the library features really must afford users training, access to support tools, knowledge of how, when, and what to use and why, what's expected, and the like. It's a very, very important part of library design. The content of the library itself. Let's look at that. What should go into your library? Well, there are two forms of content. Okay, there's the primary content, which is the actual contract template that you have, and then there's secondary content, which is basically all of your supporting resources. Okay, for the primary content, there are some three-step criteria to govern ultimately whether or not you need to include that primary content. I'm very quickly going to run through this. Okay, the first consideration is what are your subject matter requirements? Okay, if you manufacture aviation engines, you're probably going to need an engine lease agreement. That's the predominant basis upon which they're supplied. Okay, there are generic activities associated with every business, buying goods and services, licensing IP. So through the lens of subject matter contractual requirements, you come up with your rather long list of what it is that you need. Okay. Then you must, in every single case, and I promise to touch on the 80% rule, down select in accordance with the 80% principle. The 80% principle requires that you should never have more templates that are required to cover 80% of your contracting needs. 80%, what is the 80% of contracts that you sign by reference to volume, right? In terms of, the total number of contracts, what's the 80% look like? Or perhaps it's context specific by way of, category spend. What is the 80% category spend that we incur if we're looking through the procurement lens? What templates do we need for that? As a golden rule, if you use something more than 5 times a year, there is an initial case for producing a template. So we've got our subject matter contract template requirements. We down select so make sure it falls within the 80%, and then we need to determine what varietals of that contract do we need. Okay. Now, by varietals, we've talked about, do we need a long one? Do we need a short one? Do we need something for a one-off relationship or a multiple relationship? What that looks like is as follows. Okay. I've given a couple of examples here. There are effectively, there you go, there are those 5 types of varietals. You've got short contracts, long contracts, purchase orders, which is basically a short contract, but our frame and MSA. So if we are if we're a large MNC, we need some facilities management. Okay, we probably need a short form one for the guy that comes in and changes light bulbs. But if we happen to operate a nuclear power plant, then we might need a more detailed one. All right, if it's an ongoing relationship, so we're contracting with Sodexo or someone like that, maybe a frame makes good sense. So in terms of library contracts, primary, secondary, we're going to unpack secondary in a second, but there are 3 vetting points. Subject matter, what do I need? Down select so that it falls within the 80%, and then what varietals do I need? Okay. And the other thing that we need to factor in there too is the negotiation profile, right? If my facilities management provider is a take it or leave it kind of operator, well, then I probably don't need a template at all. So if you go through those, if you explore by reference to the fundamental nature of contract, we can put great pressure in terms of suppressing the number of templates that we actually require. Rules. Having great precedence on your thumb drive, on your hard drive, stored in SharePoint is helpful, but it's far from being the full picture. Rules are what makes a template library effective. You got usage rules, okay? What template do you use in what situation, right? What template, what RFP combination that you might actually need? How many times have you worked on a deal, incurred dozens, if not hundreds of unnecessary hours of work because someone served up the wrong documentation type? I remember back in my private practice days at Linklaters rolling out a mobile network in Thailand, and a rather large US law firm used an EPC contract for a communications infrastructure agreement. They billed over $5 million on that matter. It was horrendous. That thing could have been done and is done in less than 2 weeks using the right agreement. Legal review requirements. You need rules about how and when to escalate, what your review procedure is, what the authority is to agree, disagree things. Access rules. Who can access your template library and from where, right? Which parts of your library are accessible? No user needs access to absolutely everything, right? These are strategic corporate assets. Signing a protocol rules. There are more, depending upon how big and sophisticated your organization, there are advanced set rules. We call them TRAL. So contract type, someone will have access only to a specific type of contract. Job role will determine access and the like. But that's a little bit more sophisticated. You can unpack and read that in the slides later. But rules ultimately are in the ultimate manifestation of contract library efficiency. When you do use a CMLS, you have to feed in your rules into that piece of technology, otherwise it's going to do precisely zero for you. Feature 5, library location. How is your template library or your template content housed? Now, I want to make a very serious point here, because legal technology these days is the poster child for transformation. People are conflating, if I buy technology, I've transformed my legal department. It does not work like that. Okay, it just does not work like that. Technology can only leverage up and make more efficient what is efficient offline. It's a scaling device. Okay, it's going to be a long time before it's anything more than that. So you can have a perfectly effective, here's the point, you can have a perfectly effective and efficient contract precedent template library housed in an offline environment. Okay, now by offline, I don't mean manila folders and paper printouts stapled together. It could be on your C drive or your SharePoint, but obviously it can also be on your contract lifecycle management system. Using basic technologies like SharePoint is more than good enough for managing your template library. It has version controls, it has access controls, it has all the basic features that you need to run a really terrific library. I'm saying that now for anyone that might need to pump the brakes in terms of the way I'm going to fix my contract template or my template library is I'm going to go out and buy this system. No, you're going to have to do all this work anyway, offline, even before if you're going to make good use of that technology-enabled solution. The CMLS challenge is not an easy one. I'm not going to digress for too long here, but if you want to get the CMLS right, the first thing you need to ask a couple of fundamental questions, which is what do you do? What is your contract, your contracting requirement, right? What are the processes that you need observed, right? Because it's your ecosystem, right? Then you need to interrogate of your CMLS solution provider. What can their solution do, right? And you've got to ask the question, well, does it match up, right? Because this is my ecosystem and I want to bring technology to make it more efficient. I don't want to change my ecosystem just because this is the way their system works, right? So what do you do? How do you do it? What can it do? How does it do it? Is it compatible? And then there's a sort of a give and take process, which is, the exponential gain of slightly tweaking our process so it is aligned with a CMLS provider's solution. The gains are so great that it's probably worth us just nipping and tucking our process. But what you don't want to do is to have systems that have to be completely customized to accommodate how you do things, because they'll break, right? And equally, you don't want to have to change everything about how you manage your contracting process just to use a particular CMLS solution. Just for good order, that's basically what the environment looks like. Your precedent library, your users and experience, and your guidance tools all need to be able to interact with your CMLS solution, and that needs to accommodate those distinct processes and phases in the contracting cycle. Let's move on to feature 6, tools, secondary content. This is phenomenally important, and this is where the leading in-house teams are really starting to leave the pack well and truly behind. Okay, it's the use of, it's not just the production of high quality templates, but it's the creation of supporting tools that form part of the library that drive the contracting outcomes that are hoped for. I'm just going to touch on the major baskets of tools that you can be aware of. So tools that maximize return on your precedent investment. If you are going to spend your time creating these optimized templates, you need to make sure you get maximum ROI. Basic playbooks, particularly if 70% of all commercial terms are the same. Here's another fact. The 10 most commonly litigated terms in the world are the same. Okay, they've been identified by various in-house and judicial forums. Why not have a playbook which explains your position in relation to those 10 terms? So, liabilities, warranties, indemnities, etc. Okay, boilerplate, have your build ready, right? Schedules, particularly the procurement space, right? Have standardized schedules that are intuitively easy to pull together. Third-party paper. Well, what do you do when you receive third-party paper? You can't turn third-party paper into your paper. negotiation profile doesn't allow it. You can't raise every single concern that would constitute a delta between their paper and your paper. You'll never get the deal signed. So you need a more abbreviated checklist of concern which reflects your leverage profile. You need to have not a different version of your template for use in every single country, but, and I can tell you now, certainly across Southeast Asia, Asia Pacific, there are probably 6, maybe 7 at the most provisions in a standard commercial agreement that will have a genuinely differentiated position required under local law, which means massive implications for regional template libraries. So having a database of localized provisions as opposed to 400 different jurisdictional templates is a huge efficiency. So that tool is required. Frequently asked questions, right? Well, like any area of law, 80% of the queries relate to 20% of the questions. So you can achieve the same kind of things. What are frequently asked questions? Whether it's I need an NDA, where do I go? Or can we accept gifts from the counterparty? No. So there's a range of tools that we need to have. Boilerplate library. We talked about the build, okay? The definitions library. It's amazing how many organizations who are in a particular jurisdiction or a particular sector, they haven't managed to harness together the linguistic vocabulary that is used inside their organization, okay? So some effort needs to be put in place to have standard definitions, because definitions is the building block. Those definitions should reflect your group legal policy. Clause banks. Again, this is carbon principle 101 stuff, but it goes beyond just that. The clause banks can take you into the 30%. So if you do a lot of SaaS agreements, there are probably 20, maybe 30 at the most commonly used provisions that are unique to a SaaS agreement. Well, why don't you have them there ready to use and reflecting your group legal policy? Schedules we've talked about, third party we've talked about. Effectively, each of those points unpack the tool suggestions in this first point in the top left corner. So tools are not a luxury, okay? Tools are the way that you get maximum return on investment in the investment that you've made in in developing your template library. All right, now point 7, very, 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 very important. Your templates will not deliver what you're looking for if they just sit there on your thumb drive or in your CLMS, okay? Templates are used by people. People need training. Training needs to be done by reference to the actual legal templates that you're asking people to do. So what does a best practice training schedule look like, okay? It's like this. When you induct somebody into your team or into your organization, they should be trained on essential contracts to their area on induction, and then on an ongoing basis. On an ongoing basis for core key contracts which are business critical, right, or training for common positions present in each agreement, it needs to be 3 times per year. Now I say 3 times per year because you can break things down into little packages, but 3 times a year, but training really around a 30-minute time slot. That should be mandatory. And then occasionally in your training schedule, there should also be what we call special training. So for example, if someone is going for promotion, there might be more important strategic agreements that they need to be trained in and familiar with, and also an emergency situation. So, for example, when GDPR came out, Sarbanes-Oxley and those kind of things. So training as a rule, right? You need to hit people with training the moment they join your team, they join your organization, and on an ongoing basis, training in relation to core templates really needs to be occurring 3 times per year. There are so many efficiencies that you can achieve with training these days. If you use your templates, if you have a template, it's because they're used frequently. If you do training in relation to that and you digitize it, it's there for all time. It's one of those do it once and enjoy it many time investments that you can make. There's a little quote there. The only thing worse than training employees and losing them is to not train them and keep them. That's a great little quote. Home straight. Last principle, maintenance. Okay. In terms of the maintenance schedule for your library, we've got the key aspects of your library that really need to be addressed. If you use playbooks, twice a year that needs to be updated. Once from a legal team perspective, once from a user feedback perspective. Okay. Definitions library annually. Doesn't need to be more than that unless something exceptional comes up. Your boilerplate library, it's a very efficient process to get it right. But you know, the kind of things that it shouldn't change much, but let's just say that you know, as an example, the definition of your group needs to change because you know you've now deployed a franchising model, right? And you want to have franchisees to benefit from supply chain. There are irregular things, but as a matter of good order, you should just be checking the integrity of those things. Legal landscape, policy landscape, to make sure that you know all the supporting documents you need for your templates are in order once a year. Checking in with your legal terms, you know, core legal terms at least twice a year, etc. Last point, as a matter of good order, you really do need to be testing the performance of your template library. There are metrics that your legal team should be following anyway. So, for example, you know, contract closure times, renewal process, how long does it take, instances of dispute. These kind of metrics are essential to evidencing the value contribution and the time saved. Right, hours that it takes to close a contract have a dollar value, right? That you can evidence to your business the savings that you've made. So tracking the performance of your template library is very, very important. Okay, we're really on the home straight here now. I'm going to breeze this very quickly. So we've covered those 8 hallmark attendant best practice features of the library, and we've contextualized understanding by leveraging and leaning in on what we all understand to be the features of your community library. But what are some of the operating principles that really distinguish a best practice template library? Well, the best libraries are the ones that actively encourage self-help. Okay. You don't want a library which is going to drain your legal team in terms of answering questions on how to work with it. So you need to really amplify the self-help features, right? Make it so that users know where to look for answers. Make sure that, you know, if you come up with you're faced with unique questions, those answers are recycled. All this will drive continual improvement. Maintenance, we just covered that. There's a big investment that goes into getting your templates up to date, right? But it's a little bit like the boy at the proverbial dike, right? Markets move, laws change, corporate direction changes. Your templates need to be maintained, but your templates need to be built for maintenance. If you take our build approach, the 70% carbon principle, maintaining, and you should never have 200 agreements, but maintaining one set of build is far easier than trying to maintain 200 agreements, okay? Maintain the build, the 70%, and then periodically look at the remaining 30% of the clauses. And of course, if you're using a bit of legal technology, then that can be done in keystrokes. Everything needs to be designed with leverage in mind. Okay, we covered those NEO inside the matrix principles. You've got to leverage the fact that there really are very limited species of contracts. And if you master your approach to those species, coming up with minor adjustments to create your distinct varietals is not much hard work. There are limited contracting scenarios. Leverage it. Don't create templates for scenarios where you're not going to use it or you use it infrequently. Schedules. The reality is that most disputes do not occur because Jimmy or Sue in legal failed to use some really complex legal language. Most disputes arise because there was uncertainty about what needed to be done. Work can be done to alleviate risks of that confusion by standardizing schedules and laying them out in a way which is intuitively easy to complete, with examples of how to complete it alike. So design everything with leverage in mind. MIMO as a design principle, right? It might be ideal to have an extra, precedent for the slightly derivative differentiated procurement cycle, but think about what it's going to mean in terms of exponential work. Really want to input minimum input, right? So minimum, if all you managed to do every year was to update your build, which is 70% of your agreement, that's massive. Okay. The library scope, the 80% rule, shoot for no more that's not needed. Right? This is the hardest thing. More is not more when it comes to templates. 80% of contracting scenarios that in. What's used 80% of the time? 80% of the user profiles, what do they need? Okay, start asking and challenging yourself and eradicate anything that doesn't meet these requirements. Measure performance, we sort of touched on that. That's a very important principle in terms of the operations. Library size, small as possible, right? People always ask us, well, what's the optimal number of templates? We've seen some of the biggest companies in the world get by with between, no more than 30 to 40 templates. As amazing as that sounds, right? 30 to 40 templates with maybe some modular provisions which go in the back to flex for a particular procurement cycle, a small database of localized calls. We did a project not so long ago for a global airline. They had over 270 templates, and then they had local country versions for all 23 outstations. We got that down to 37 templates. Okay, one source of the truth. Okay, you cannot have users who are so fed up using your templates they start using their own library, creating their own library of the deal that they did before, which was negotiated, and they use as a starting point for the next deal. Your template library has to be the one source of the truth. If you want people to do that, you have to apply these best practice principles. Okay, you've got to use short agreements. You've got to use clear agreements. You've got to use well-structured agreements. You've got to give people reasons to want to use your templates. Socialize, obviously. Design it for your ecosystem. Don't overspec things. Okay, don't create too many. Keep it short and as clear and to the point as humanly possible. We've got single source of the truth here again, but we've called it an amnesty and a purge, right? So when you actually have good templates with your organization, with your confidence, say, hey guys, use this, declare an amnesty and ask everybody, look, hand over your weapons of destruction. Please stop using these, purge all these things. Here are the ones that we've got. Ownership, right? Legal teams should always own. Legal should always own. Procurement should never own templates. If there are any procurement members on this call, you shouldn't own it. Okay, you need to go to, you shouldn't own it. Approach to variable data, right? Agreements should always have the static provisions in the front end and variable provisions in the back end. Real-time feedback is very important. You've got to talk to users all the time and ask them what they think of the use of the library, the use of the templates, and you re-articulate that performance data back into improving it, and then obviously monitor things. So that is it. That is our tour de force with 1 minute to spare of best practice library. Just to reiterate, managing template libraries is been a little bit like gremlins. Okay, they multiply, and they get big enough so that the satanic horde ends up wreaking havoc on your organization, such that people end up using their own or not using that single source of the truth. More is not less. We have to step away and look at the true essence of the contract and the contracting process. And there are some truisms that if we lean in and leverage on them, the whole process of creating templates and managing them becomes far more simple. There are really only two types of contracts, long ones and short ones. Okay, how you draft them is distinct. For each contract, 70% is by and large the same, right? Of course, there might be somebody sitting there saying that I do aviation fuel forward derivatives contracts and therefore I don't agree with anything. You're in the 20%. Okay, you're in the 20%. This is not what this session is about. You're so special, your contracts are so complex. That's why you have a job. We're talking about the 80%. Okay, the number of varietals that you use. Well, if you look at it by reference to how many times you can use it as a one and done, or is it a relationship, and your position in the pecking order, right? Do I have the strength to project my own paper, or do I have to respond to somebody else? If you attend to those, you put your effort and focus into those, then by and large, you've taken care of most of the design and maintenance, ongoing maintenance requirements for template libraries. Those features of the features of a good template library, they're omnipresent. templates is an upfront initial investment, but the moment you stop, right, maintaining it, you're depleting your investment. It's ongoing work, but if you leverage these efficient principles of template library design, management, and maintenance, the effort burden of that process is significantly diminished. More than happy to take any questions, Nick, should they've been sent through.
Oh, thanks very much, Matt. First question we have is, we already have over 110 templates. How do we go about rationalizing these down to a sensible number?
Yeah, okay, well, we've covered all of that. You've got to work out what your 80% is, okay? Whether it's by the total number of contracts, how do we cover templates the total number of contracts that are signed, what does 80% of that look like? What falls within that? There's a business criticality thing in there, you know, what contracts are so important that we need to have our own paper. You need to work out whether or not you're using the right template design. Have you effectively got a services agreement, right, that could, by reference to the inclusion of schedules with subject matter specific provisions, can pivot and become, you know, 10 different varietals of a service or 10 different subject matter varietals of an agreement. There are so many ways to trim back. Unless you literally are Hyundai, you know, a really diverse super conglomerate, there's no way in the world you need 110 agreements, even if you're operating in 30 countries. There's always the risk that you know, we've gilded the lily as lawyers, right? By creating new agreements and really, you know, the subject matter only pivots by, you know, 5-10%. We actually have a lovely little white paper that if you shoot your details through to Nick on how to go through that down selection phase. And whenever we do a library template update project for clients, it's usually the subject matter of a very confronting working session where we really challenge the basis upon, you know, what you've sought to include and why you need so many varietals of you know, the same agreement, and is it really so different that you needed a different language, sorry, not a different law version of the agreement. So I hope that helps, and on reflection, I hope that you'll, when you get the slides, you'll see some of those principles come through. But effectively, you have to force yourself into the 80-20 rule.
Fantastic. Well, thanks very much. Last question we have is, are there any good tips for how to deal with different language versions of our templates? For example, how to ensure that they're all all language variations are maintained to the same standard at the same time as the master template.
Yeah. Okay. So the first fundamental question that you have to address is there a legal requirement for maintaining a different language version? So, for example, if we're dealing with our neighbours in Indonesia, yes, there'd be a Bahasa requirement, or is it more just a customer preference or market preference? Dealing in a, you know, an organisation will have its official business language, and wherever possible, there's not a hard and fast rule, but wherever possible, you want to deal in as few languages as possible. The second and more complete answer, leaving aside those kind of considerations about the predominant business language and legal requirements, is the process of maintaining synchronicity across language derivatives is a manual and difficult process. We've had some of the biggest organizations in the world come to us and say, you know, what solutions can we offer? And we're looking at these automatic translation type things. And the results are, to date, I'm not saying it will always be like this in the future, is unsatisfactory. Okay. But there are some tips. Okay. You need to decide what your central business language is, and you should only have translations from, say, English to Bahasa or English to Japanese or English to German and the like. You need to avoid a daisy chain of translation from one language to another language to another language. Okay, that's the first core tip. Second is that maintaining multiple languages is a really, really difficult exercise in terms of accuracy, particularly when it relates to the legal subject matter. A translator, which are expensive, is one thing, but legal translation is another thing. We have clients that spend more on translation per hour than they do for actual accessing legal services. So I guess the key thing is that if you have to maintain multiple languages, you're going to have to accept that in doing so, if it's a legal requirement, well, you just have to. But if it's a preference, you have to accept it's a preference you're going to have to pay for. Otherwise, there's going to be real challenges. When you look at things like, and if you don't believe anything that I've said, right, well, let's go and look at the major matter lifecycle management systems for legal teams or contract lifecycle management systems. Look at the language optionality that those systems offer, and you will find that it is really quite limited. Okay, so there's no perfect answer, but I'm going to summarize it in 3. Don't maintain multiple languages if it's just merely a preference, right? Look for be guided by legal requirements, translate by reference to your official business language, and accept that it's an imperfect process, at least based on currently available solutions and translator capabilities.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. And with that, I think we'll probably draw today's session to an end. So thank you to everyone who attended today. Recording of this session will be loaded onto the GLS website in the next 48 hours. So if you do have any friends or colleagues who you think would be interested in today's subject, please do feel free to point them to the site.
Yeah,
with that,
and Nick, just a final just one for the team that asked about the down select, right? What are the factors? If they want to reach out, we can provide more information as to what the vetting questions are in terms of how you run an effective down select exercise, and that'll hopefully help them reduce the number of templates they've got. Thank you very much, everyone. Appreciate you making time to join the session.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, everyone. Bye.